Today on CityCast Chicago, whether you're a new college student about to live on your own or you're just reminded that the rent is due, now is a good time to get your finances in order before the reality of fall kicks in. At least that's what my horoscope says this month. Host Jacoby Cochran, former CityCaster Carrie Shepard, and I got some tips from a budgeting expert earlier this year, and we're sharing them again. It's Wednesday, August 2nd. I'm Simona Licea in for Jacoby, and this is what Chicago's talking about.
So I'm here with lead producer Carrie Shepard and producer Simone Alisea. Carrie, Simone, I got to ask you, y'all got budgets? Carrie, right, laughter ensued. We wrote it in the script and it still was like, it's going to happen. So let me change the question because I already know the answer. And if y'all can't tell by their silence, the answer is nah, we ain't them kind of people. But I would start with this then. Carrie, how do you budget your finances? How do you keep track of them, pay attention to them?
Okay, this is this is a good question. I would say, obviously, I'm in a legal partnership, so my husband does. Our husband does have a budget for us. I mentioned this also because both of us are older, quote unquote. We didn't get married in our 20s, so we both came into our relationship with our finances fairly set. And back in the day, it used to be like everybody combines their finances, and that is not the reality for a lot of couples like us. So in terms of how do I watch my spending, the big spending, I do have a financial advisor for whom I work with on making sure my retirement's in the right place, making sure.
That sounds fancy to me. I'm sorry.
I know. I was thinking the same thing.
Extra nod over here because we was like, oh, damn. You never mentioned the FA.
I got to tell you, strongly suggest. Really.
Okay.
I've had him since I was in my 20s and didn't have a lot of money. He was a friend of my brother's, and I trust him. But also, this is someone that you can go to when you make big purchases, like when I purchased a condo. This is someone also, when I switched jobs, I made sure to ask, like, what should I do in terms of this retirement plan? So you just want someone like that who can answer those questions and break it down and make it easy for you. And just kind of another set of eyes. Let's be honest, like I'm not the type of person who wants to watch where my 401k and 403b are every day. There are people who do that, who are really tied into the stock market. I don't want to do that, so he does it for me and I trust him. So I think that is actually a good tip, and for that really, it's not a fancy thing. People who don't have a ton of money have financial advisors too. So I would suggest getting one.
No, that's a very good point. And Simone, I kind of have a slightly different question because you've just sort of come back to Chicago in the last couple of years. But the last time you were here, you were in school and then you were sort of in your first job out of school. Coming back to the city, did you come back with a thought of, all right, I'm going to be more fiscally responsible. I'm going to budget now. I'm making more money now that I come back to the city? Or were you already kind of in a groove and you've just continued that since you've been back in terms of personal budgeting?
I think that's a really astute observation because I would say, like, I'm kind of right on that cusp, right? I am now out of that, like, young 20s, just trying to, like, stay out of debt, just trying to pay my rent, just trying to, like, get up in my job. And now I'm at a point now in my career where it's like, okay, I've got a stable job. I now have 2 401ks that I've not merged in any way from switching jobs. Haven't figured that out yet.
Financial advisor can help you.
Truly, like I need to, like, I have now, like, built up some savings, but I don't really have, like, a financial goal in mind. And so I'm, like, right on that cusp of, like, I'm now making enough money that, like, I should really start thinking about what to do with it other than just, like, getting by and saving. And, like, I've paid off a few debts that were really big that have now come down quite a lot. So it's like I'm very much in this, like, in-between space financially, I feel like.
No, I relate to that a lot. Before the podcast, I was very much not only just check to check, it was very much job to job because I was.
Well, you were doing a lot of freelance work too.
Yeah,
right?
I was a university adjunct professor, and so that was like the most stable. And you're not making a lot of money. One class might get you $2,500 a semester, and outside of that, I'm hoping for voiceover work, hoping for some storytelling gigs to pay something. And so I was in a very precarious situation where it was just sort of long as my bills are paid, long as I can eat. But I felt like my situation sort of kept me budgeted. So I didn't like overspend. I didn't
Right,
buy a
right.
bunch of excess things that I couldn't afford just because I couldn't. And so the last couple of years have probably been me just like breathing on the fact that like my situation isn't as sort of precarious. And so, I moved somewhere else. So my rent has gone up, right? Maybe I, probably buy way too much takeout and have eaten at some
Yeah.
nicer restaurants in the
Yep.
last couple of years. But I know, from the people I talk, like my mother, for example, she is extremely meticulous. Like my
Yeah.
mother still like bookkeeps the way my grandmother taught. So she writes a lot of her finances down, like personal, like by hand. She
Totally.
works with somebody to do her taxes. But the more and more I talk to those people like my mom, they do say there is a benefit to having some type of budgeting plan. And Carrie, I know you talk to someone who really this is their sort of work, helping people to manage their finances, helping people to create individualized, unique budgetings. So who did you talk to, and what was some of the things that they wanted to share in terms of how to get started in personal budgeting?
I talked to Kimberly Palmer. She's a senior writer at NerdWallet. So here is one tip that she said.
Well, the first thing to know about starting a budget is that you can just ballpark your figures. You don't have to be super specific or break out a calculator. And I think that takes out some of the stress. So basically, you want to start with a 50, 30, 20 approach. And that basically means you want 50% of your take home pay going towards needs. And that's things like housing and food. You have 30% set aside for wants. And that's going out to eat, for example, or entertainment. And then you have the 20% for any debt payments like student loans and savings. So if you're in an expensive city like Chicago, for example, you might need to spend more of your take-home pay, a greater percentage on housing. And that's just because it's hard to avoid it when you're living in a high-cost area. And so putting all your needs together into that 50% bucket, it just gives you that flexibility.
When y'all look at y'all landscape, I sort of look at things just like at the beginning of every month, I sort of calculate how much money is going to come in. And then I just sort of pull my calculator out and I just start subtracting. I got to pay for this. I got to pay for this. I got to pay for this.
Yep.
I gotta pay for this, I gotta pay-
Budgeting.
All right.
Good for you. That's
This is what I'm going to have left. I know, but then when I have the left, I just stop paying attention to that number.
Yes, exactly.
I'm like, all right,
That is
all of
okay.
the needs are taken care of. And then I'm just like, all right, that number will sit in there. When you think, do you think you're in a sort of 50, 30, 20 type of setup right now, Carrie?
I would say that's about right. I think that at this point in my life, I have automatic payments set up and sort of have automated as much as I can to ensure that like all of that is kind of taken care of for me. So you always want to make sure, I want to make sure my mortgage is paid. I want to make sure that all the bills are paid, obviously. This is all taken out. Plus, all of my retirement and what I'm setting aside also automated from my paycheck. So it's kind of like I'm not really seeing it so much.
feel that.
But like I know that I'm not going to be coming up to the 6th of the month when you start getting late fees for your mortgage and be like, I don't have enough for the mortgage. Like that's got to go first. There's no eating out. There's no new dress. That's all that stuff. All the 50%, that's got to go first.
I'm just so scared of auto pay. Like the only things that are on
Really?
auto pay are the things that just naturally do it. So like Hulu, Netflix, and any Apple. So like my terabyte of space, music, that all gets auto pay. I do have and another thing that auto pays is like I have the sort of Rocket Money app. And so it like just pulls a certain amount every week of like savings. So it's like, hey, I'm taking this $200 today
yeah.
and just putting it in sort of a savings account that's moving. But the one thing that I often don't pay attention to, and I'm gonna just be real, is sort of my biggest debt, right? I make all of I have like a couple, like a PayPal credit card, like a Macy's, I pay those. But the one that, especially post-pandemic, that I have not really sort of got back engaged with is them student loans. Them things, I didn't have help during school. And so I just took out more money and more money. And I went to school for 6 years when you add in grad school. And so that's the thing that I definitely need to start creating a plan for and paying attention to, because I know it towards the end of grad school, I really was just like, man, they gonna have to wipe this out. We over $1 trillion and I ain't paying it. They better wipe this out. But I know that I can't bank on that.
Probably the best thing I did is right after graduation, I set up an automatic payment plan for my student loans. And so I was paying on it during the pandemic too. So I paid down the principal. One of the better financial decisions I've ever made. The one thing I will say about this 50-30-20 thing is like that 50% bucket for needs. It's sort of a response to that old adage that like you shouldn't be paying more than a third of your income for housing, right? And like maybe you have to pay more in an expensive place like Chicago or in another city. I will say I don't like that. I still think that I don't like that that's true. Like it bothers me that that's how expensive housing is in these cities, is that, instead of saying like we should find a way to reduce the cost of housing on our population, people should just budget better and maybe budget more toward their housing. And you understand what I mean? Like,
yeah, because we also don't have control over that. Your rent since you moved here has gone up hundreds of dollars. My rent since moving to Hyde Park, even when I was in stuff, all rent of the last few places I lived have climbed hundreds of dollars over the time. So I agree with you 100%. It isn't as simple as being like, well, it was 30% last year or 2 years ago, but due to circumstances outside of my control, right now I have to readjust. So I agree with you. There's like a structural part to this conversation when we talk about personal budgeting that is, sure, managing your own money. But when so much of what you're trying to pay for, whether it is groceries, whether it is housing, basic services in your city, transportation, these things are not in your control many times. We do need to figure out how do we tackle rising costs, because wages, right? The primary way most of us pay for everything in our life has not increased at the same rate as any of these other things that we're talking about. And Kim kind of mentions some of these things that are out of our control, but also gives us maybe a couple of tools we can use to kind of pay attention to our debt throughout the month.
So that is an area that varies so much person to person. And right now, of course, we're in an environment with interest rates rising. It's expensive. And so you do want to try to pay off debt and allocate more money toward that if you have the flexibility to do so. And I think this is an area where tools can really help. So, for example, I'm a huge fan of using online calculators. If, for example, you're paying off debt, you can plug in your numbers to an online calculator and see, okay, if I put a little bit more each month into paying off this debt, can I get totally debt-free even sooner than I had otherwise planned?
That's a much better plan than I had, which was hope that I hit a big commercial and do better than I did the last time I hit a commercial. Because when that AT&T money came in, your boy lost his mind. He was like, I'm not paying nothing. I had a whole plan in the way. I was like, okay, I'm going to start paying this debt and this debt. And then them checks start rolling in. I was like, I'm going to be getting commercials forever. You hear this voice? I ain't booked a national commercial since. And
so this was your AT&T commercial.
Yes, this was my debt plan at one point. Okay. Just wait for the commercials to come in.
Kimberly and I talked about this a little bit in terms of tools. There are a lot of apps now that just that replace the Jacoby's mom and me balancing our checkbook, calling, I remember my mom calling the bank, be like, what's my balance? What's my balance? And so these tools will help do that for you, because I was like, I'll just picture do I have to make an Excel spreadsheet? I can't do that. And she's like, there's so many apps and tools now that you can use that can help with that.
And they can be really visual. So you've probably heard ads for Mint Mobile, right? They can put stuff into graphs and make it look pretty. NerdWallet itself has a budgeting tool. And then a lot of financial institutions, if your bank has an app, a lot of those apps include some budgeting tools, which again, you can kind of shift your money into categories. It'll tell you when you're overspending. You can set up alerts and that kind of thing. I have had mixed luck with my bank's app on that front. It's been really good for kind of seeing, it shows me how much I spend on takeout and delivery, which is too much. That visual is never going to leave my head. Ever.
I love miscellaneous purchase. He's just like, you had an uncategorized huge purchase this month. What was that? I was like, I'm not telling you. Mind your business. Put it in the other. Put it in the other. Rocket money. when we start thinking about this last category of savings, right? It's a really privileged conversation to be talking about just making enough money to put aside. But when you talk to anybody about sort of, you know, how to be more financially savvy, they will tell you finding a way to save even small increments. And I know Kimberly made a point to that as well.
Typically, financial advisors will say you need 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. But I think that's such a daunting and intimidating number. I think it can be more helpful to pick something lower, something like, say, I'll try to save, I don't know, $500 by the end of the year. But just having a reasonable amount that you could set aside by putting some amount every week into a high yield savings account, it can just give you that wiggle room. And also, then when an expense does pop up, it means you can turn to your savings instead of turning to a really high interest credit card. And that down the road, saves you a lot of trouble and money.
When she says a high yield savings account, I feel like my savings account is just money sits there, but it doesn't actually do nothing. High yield, that means when you put it in an account that's accruing interest over time. Am I correct in that?
You're correct. And making sure your money works for you, making sure you're making money off your money is what that is. I have to say, so the savings account, this is the savings thing. Both of you referenced this, and I think this is where I can use my age/wisdom. Starting like with my first job where I had a salary, I remember my brother saying, your company will match up to X% of what you put away in retirement. And at the time, it was before the crash, 2008. And my brother said, max it out, and cut he's like, I promise you're not going to see it right now, but you're going to see it down the road. And he was right. And also, even when I was at that age, I started just putting auto $50 into savings, $50. And then when I got a financial advisor, I created this quote unquote slush fund, which is what Kimberly's talking about, the 3 to 6 months. And I remember he and I saying like, what is this for? And I remember saying, what if I want to quit my job and freelance? And he was like, okay, this is how much you'll need for that. I didn't do that, but I did use my slush fund for my down payment of my condo in 2018. I had saved up a lot. I put 20% down on my own for my condo, and it helped me a ton.
No, and like Kimberly said, she was like these are tips, but really, as you listen to this conversation, figure out how to make it work for you. If the 50, 30, 20, if these, save this much or max out your if these are things that just are not available to you, it's sort of still find the sort of root of each of these, right? Just what is your debt? Are you familiar? Are you aware of where all your debt is? Are you aware of how your money is sort of going in and out? It's just that small habit, and not to the point again where it's where you should feel ashamed if you're not able to do these things.
Absolutely.
As long as you're able to sort of start making sense of it. And again, this is, as we've made clear in this conversation, this is things all three of us are continuing to work on, are continuing to try to prove on. But that last point that Kimberly makes is, regardless of your situation, the thing that's going to help you most in your own personal journey is sticking with it, is finding a plan, finding something that works with you, and being consistent.
Well, the worst habit of all is just, kind of shutting your eyes to all the spending, and just, it can be so overwhelming that you don't even want to look. So I think the first bad habit to overcome is to make sure you do know where your money is going. And the easiest way to start with that is just by tracking expenses for a short period. So say for the last 2 weeks, look at every single place your money went. And it might turn out you're spending much more than you realized on a category. Another bad habit is the recurring expenses that we have. It's so easy to gloss over those and not even notice them. But for example, I signed up for a bunch of subscriptions during the pandemic, and they were just all auto-renewing. So be sure to take a close look at all those recurring expenses.
Streaming. That's such a streaming services one.
And I'm about to add YouTube because I'm so tired of them ads. After this conversation, I'm like, bro, you don't need it. Because everything I look at in $4.99 increments. And after a while, that adds up.
That adds up. Well, and then they're raising their prices all the time. Netflix raising prices all the time. When I hear Kimberly talk about this, they're like, I very much am one of these people where it's like I don't have bad financial habits. Like I'm paying my debt, I'm saving money, I'm not outspending what I make. But like I also like have money in places that I kind of don't know. Like I have an Acorns account and I've got a savings account and I've got two 401ks just like out there in the ether and I don't really know what's
Mhm.
in either of those accounts. Like I don't know if my savings account is a quote unquote high yield savings account. Like should I change bank? I've had the same bank provider since I was in college because that was the bank that was on campus. Like there was no
Mhm.
rhyme or reason
I still
to
remember going with my mom to the Jewel out in like Matson or something and signing up for my first
Yeah.
account as like a junior or
Yeah.
something.
And so like I I feel like there's like I have hit a point now where I've like accrued various different financial things and I don't really know how they all work together or like what is even possible for me
Mhm.
monetarily. And that to me is like the hardest like thing to get over to like try and sort through it all and make it make sense.
Mhm. I mean, we're about to enter into, a couple of weeks, just sort of an overload of fun things to do.
Yep.
So having this conversation about personal budgeting next to like, this very, I think, I don't know, at least when I was younger, there was this sort of money comes back, but experiences don't, right? You can make some more money later, but
Exactly.
take that trip now. Like,
Yes. Yes.
I spent so little in my 20s on myself and on fun things. Like, it's not that I didn't have fun. It's just I always found a free way to do it. I always found like a super dirt cheap way to do stuff. And I was
Yeah.
never buying clothes. So now it's like even just doing those little things of like, oh, I can just go stop off at the bar and have a beer because I can. Or like, oh, I bought 2 dresses just this weekend. So it's interesting because like I'm also sort of just getting into that mentality more than I was, while at the same time also sort of realizing for the first time that I should also have financial goals. Like for me, it's all happening at once. It's happening right.
I
It's
hear
all
you.
like
Hmm.
happening right at this moment.
I agree. I'm glad you're doing that, Simone. And Jacoby, what you're saying too. I traveled so much looking back in my 20s on the cheap, like just really was like, just did it cheaply. And then as I got older and I was like, oh, okay, I can stay in a nicer hotel. Also, like you're saying, experiences, like for us, for like my husband and I, like travel is really important to us, So that is something we absolutely budget for. More important to us than, I don't know, whatever it may be. I think you have to realize the stuff that makes you happy. And like, I agree on this idea of saving all your money for it's a privilege saving your money, but you do have to experience things if you can experience them because those chances leave you, you know?
Yeah. And then one last tip, I think something again that's very personal to me that I think probably a lot of people relate to is if you didn't grow up in households where you learned sort of financial literacy, where you learned how to save, it at least for me, it has felt sometimes very overwhelming to start that process. But with these tips, even just from this conversation, sort of taking that process on little by little, sort of similar to like maybe those workout goals we set every January, right? When the new year pops up, it's like,
Yeah.
as you listen to these TikTok gurus, the YouTube, the online people telling you it's got to be 50, 30, 20, just remind yourself you can ease your way into it. You can set small financial goals that sort of balloon over time as your situation changes. But you're not alone. Lead producer Carrie Shepard, producer Simone Alisea. I appreciate y'all making time today.
Thank you.
Thank
Same.
you. Before we let you go, a little bit of news. Northwestern University has hired former U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch to review the school's processes for reporting abuse in response to allegations of hazing in NU football and other sports programs. Several lawsuits have also been filed. Chicago Department of Transportation Commissioner Gia Biaggi has announced her resignation effective August 11th. She'll be the third department head to leave since Mayor Brandon Johnson won the runoff in April. We spoke with Biaggi in March about making Chicago streets safer. Find a link to that episode in the show notes. And newsletter editor Sydney Madden has more news for you in Hey Chicago, including the cost of NASCAR and a recap of new shelters for migrants in the city. Make sure you're signed up at chicago.citycast.fm. And some good news to get you through. Starting this week, families can catch performances of In My Granny's Garden in parks across Chicago. The show and workshop from the Goodman Theater are designed to help kids 5 and younger understand where food comes from. The first performances are this Thursday in the Irving Park neighborhood and Friday in West Englewood. Check the show notes for details because it looks adorable. That's it for today. Tomorrow, I'm going to take you to the first dog park on the Southwest Side, and we're going to meet some very good pups. I'll talk to you then.